I begged with him to stop this madness and flee while we had a chance, and he insisted that once open, our victory would be secured. Mr. Harris pushed the lid aside and barely had a moment to regard his secret weapon in the flesh before an olive-toned arm, sword in hand, lashed out from within the box and sliced his head clean off. Lord Blackwood and the Great Tarasque Hunt of '83. May 14th, 1883. I received the most curious missive in the post this morning. It has been 4 months since I returned to England, having nearly lost my life in endeavoring to become the first man to reach the summit of a foreboding and deadly Mount Everest. I have spent the time since in research and recovery here in London, nursing my wounds and documenting my memoirs of the harrowing trip of the mountain and my nearly fatal encounter with the creature I found there, a tale which I fear may never be told outside these diaries. And I have not planned to embark again for distant shores until after summer has passed. That has changed, I fear, as a result of today's letter. It was a formal affair written in a folded card like a wedding invitation, sealed in its finest envelope, and I present to you below. To Lord Theodore Thomas Blackwood, CBE. Colonel Joseph d'Infante, Lamar de Thiers of Republic of France, does hereby cordially invite you to participate in a hunt of a great and terrible creature that threatens the lives of thousands, the Tarasque. A creature great and terrifying, of late believed to be legend, has arisen and threatens the security of the land of Provence and France itself. Colonel d'Infante has been authorized by the President of the Republic to pay a sum of 5 million English pounds to the man or men who shall slay this infamous beast. RSVP in care of Colonel d'Infante, number 22, Kensington Road, Knightsbridge, London. I immediately dashed off an acceptance and sent out with the afternoon post. Though I have hunted foxes and elephants and every beast great and small, in between I have never heard of such a creature as the Tarasque, and it certainly never had an opportunity to hunt one. I spent my afternoon in the study, poring over the encyclopediae and tomes of history and mythology, before I found the term in the collection of folk tales regarding Saint Martha, sister to Mary Magdalene, who had supposedly calmed the beast with her song. The text described it as a vicious creature, a massive chimera that breathed fire and whose scaly hide repelled every blade, that killed without remorse and seemed only to wreak chaos for its enjoyment. When the last delivery of the day came just before tea time, I had received an address and directions to attend a briefing the day after tomorrow in the city. I have always been a firm believer in the proposition that even in the most preposterous of myths, there lies a kernel of truth. Whether an ancient behemoth that breathed fire was bringing ruination to the south of France, I knew not. But I knew that the army and the president themselves were concerned enough to seek out a man such as myself, and were willing to offer a bounty that I would finance a score of proper expeditions for the killing of a single beast. On Wednesday, I will learn why. May 16th, 1883. Today I attended Colonel d'Infante's meeting, held in a private room in the city at the club owned by Messrs. Marshall, Carter, and Dark. Lest the reader question my morality, I assure you that I am no member, dues paying or otherwise, of that association. I find their stocking in the trade offensive and deplorable, and their clientele even more so. But on this day, the windowless establishment was free of its usual throng of libertines and bohemians, replaced by a handful of officers and men in the uniforms of French, a handful of our own soldiers guarding the door, servants and waiters apparently relieved to be in our company rather than that of their usual employers, offered drinks and hors d'oeuvres, I did not say that right, to their guests. Wow, I butchered that word so bad. I know it. Besides myself, there was 3 guests of honor at the meeting. There was an American, Mr. Roosevelt, a young man who had made for himself already quite a name as a hunter of big game in the American West. There was Mr. Dukov, a Russian I knew of by reputation as a scientist and historian. Lastly, there was another Englishman, the same Mr. Harris whom readers of these pages may recall as he whom I matched wits with on the banks of the Nile in 1855. I will spare the reader the excruciating details of our past intercourse. Suffice to say that Mr. Harris and I were schoolmates at Eton, that I regarded him then as little more than common blackguard, and that what news I have heard of him since has been giving me little reason to change my assessment of his personage. Colonel DeFronte, the short and middle-aged man who bore signs of great fatigue and worry, spoke briefly and elaborated on his reasons for calling the four of us. The being that his government had come to call the Tarasque, he said, had first appeared the Sunday after Easter near the village of Tarasque, named most coincidentally for the mythical beast itself, and had destroyed the town utterly, claiming several thousand souls in the process. The handful of survivors who escaped the devastation described a great lizard, nimble and merciless, that had charged directly into town and destroyed everyone and everything in its path, crushing, smashing, and devouring people, livestock and buildings alike. One man, a farmer whose wife and children had been ripped to shreds by the beast, claimed that it spoke to him in plain French and told him of them. Ils étant repugnants. Since then, the colonel said, 3 outlying villages and countless farms in the province had fallen to the Tarasque. It attacked without mercy or reason, killed indiscriminately, and left only devastation in its wake. The army had sent men and horses and cavalry against it. There were few survivors, and those who lived claimed the beast had been struck directly by artillery and neither flagged nor missed a step, the hole in its chest seemingly knitting together as it charged their position. Their entire region had been quarantined. Citizens were being evacuated by the thousands, and the army and the press were passing stories of plagues and Prussian revanchists. But the government feared the worst could soon come to pass. Nimes, Avignon, and Arles were in danger if the beast continued to rage. The four of us, the colonel claimed, were the finest hunters and scientific minds available and known to his government. He knew not if we were capable of taking down such a monster between our expert knowledge and unique access to the finest tools and weapons known to science. He hoped we could succeed where his own forces had failed. I left the meeting with a stack of papers, details of my army's knowledge of the Tarasque based on what reconnaissance they have to date endeavored. On Saturday, the four of us will board a steamer across the channel and travel to the epicenter of this pandemonium ourselves. Deeds, my loyal valet, has begun packing my bags, and is having the more exotic armaments in my arsenal prepared for shipping. I do not anticipate working with Mr. Harris any more than I anticipate shaking hands with the devil, but Messrs. Roosevelt and Dukov appear to be of sound mind and fine spirit, and with luck, our motley quartet shall return to England with a fortune in our pockets and a story to tell. May 1883. May 20th, 1883. We disembarked in Avignon after the uneventful trip by train from Calais. It may seem strange for a globetrotter such as myself, but until this weekend, I have never had an occasion to travel to France. After all, it is a civilized place, lacking in the ancient mysteries and elusive game that is my passion, or so I would have thought. Mr. Roosevelt and I spent many hours sharing our tales of adventure. I find in him a true intellectual who understands what it means to be a naturalist. Mr. Dukov I found more difficult to talk to. He is a private man, who prefers the company of his books and his studies to that of his fellows. He proudly displayed a variety of his own inventions he intended to test against the Tarasque. A gun that fires beams of electricity, a jellied kerosene that burns without exploding, and what he described as his latest prototype, a large rifle on a tripod, fueled by refined pitch blende, which I suspect is not entirely different than Mr. Mott's destabilizing muskets, none of which I had brought myself. I did my best to avoid speaking to Mr. Harris during the trip. I intend our expedition to be no less than a gentleman, but the man leaves a sour taste in my mouth. When we boarded the train at Calas, I watched him as he had a large crate loaded onto the train, which he told us to contain his secret weapon. He refused to tell us what the box contained, but viewing it made me uncomfortable. The air seemed to chill as it was carried by. In any event, it is too large to fit in our wagon. For now, we shall be leaving it in a bank vault in Avignon. Our weapons and provisions have been loaded onto a wagon, and horses have been ready for us tomorrow. Colonel d'Infante will escort us to the edge of the quarantine zone. From there, he says the four of us shall be on our own. He can spare no more soldiers, lest the beasts attack the fortifications directly and break loose. May 21st, 1883. I have seen horrors of war often enough in my years. I saw the wrath of the British Empire firsthand when I led troops in the Opium Wars. In Africa, I have seen native tribes fight to the last man, destroying everything in their path. And in the Crimea, I barely escaped with my life as thousands of men fought and died and cities were laid bare. The destruction I saw there pales in comparison to what I have beheld in the Tarasque wake. Avignon itself looked like a city at war. Soldiers patrolling the streets, barricades at the edge of town. Not far outside the city, we reached the edge of the quarantine zone. Soldiers have been hard at work, digging trenches, erecting fortifications. The young men keeping watch looked battle-scarred as they had seen indescribable horror. A constant stream of evacuees made their way out of the area. Women and children, some with little more than clothes on their back. Many looked confused and agitated, as if they had no clue why they were being removed from their homes. On the faces of others, there was no doubt. I asked on passing if any of them had yet seen the Tarasque. Only a few. The scouts and the lookouts had seen it from a distance. I was told for nobody who had engaged the beast at close range was still alive. It had not yet dared to attack the perimeter the army had erected, but 2 days prior, a watchman told me, he spotted it a mile from the front line, seemingly staring back at him. Mr. Harris begrudgingly agreed to ride out alone and scout for the beast, while Mr. Roosevelt, Mr. Dukov, and I followed the road to Tarasque to learn what we could of the nature of our quarry. Tarasque itself was a scene of utter ruination. Bodies lay by score in the streets where they had fallen. Much of the town had been consumed by fire. The town's famous castle and other stone buildings dashed to rubble, and massive holes torn in walls will remain standing. We saw not a living soul, no man or woman, no livestock, no vermin, no birds or beasts of the field. Even the greenery of the town seemed to have been destroyed. I began to feel pangs of doubt in my stomach as we surveyed the scene. Could one creature have truly wreaked such destruction? We set up camp on the edge of the dead town. Mr. Harris returned by evening and informed us we had spotted the Tarasque to the southwest, near the village of Bellegarde. In the act of destroying a farmhouse, its route, he said, had not been difficult to trace, for a swath of barren land seemed to lay a trail. Even the grass itself was not safe from the Tarasque wrath. Tomorrow we will follow this trail and engage the beast. May 22nd, 1883. We have met the Tarasque this day, and we are lucky to escape with our lives. We traveled southwest to Belleville, which we found in a state of destruction, not unlike that of Tarasque itself. From there, we followed the creature's trail as it meandered south, then west, then northwest through the farmlands, drawing uncomfortably close to Nimes. Shortly after midday, we spotted the creature in the distance. It was stationary, seeming to nap in the afternoon sun. It was a massive thing, longer than a whale and taller than a giraffe, and it looked to outweigh either. Its scales glistened in the sun, and its teeth, massive and shining, were bared as it rested along the chaos it had wrought. Had it wings, I would have called it a dragon. With our weapons in tow, we stealthily approached the beast to a range of less than 100 feet. Mr. Dukov set up his pitch-blende gun, which he claimed would take some time to charge before it could be fired, while Mr. Roosevelt and Mr. Harris prepared their elephant guns, and I readied my particle destabilizer. Behind a short fence demarcating one of the now abandoned farms, we drew straws, and it was agreed I would take the first shot at the abomination. Steadying my gun across the fence, I took careful aim for the sleeping Tarasque's head. I held my breath, made my final adjustment, and fired. The shot hit square and true, and we watched with delight as the top of the Tarasque head was shorn clean off. The beast slumped to the ground, and I breathed a sigh of relief. In one shot, the beast that had killed thousands and menaced a nation was dead. Mr. Harris let out a cheer, and then the dead beast came to life. It rose to its feet and turned in our direction. Blood, brains, and gore oozed from its skull as a head missing an eye stared us down. It let out a blood-curdling roar before it charged at us faster than a bull elephant. Mr. Roosevelt and Mr. Harris barely had time to fire a round at each of the beasts before we were forced to scatter. Harris tossed aside his elephant gun for a smaller repeater he had been carrying and discharged a magazine in the Tarasque's flank. And we watched in horror as the wounds it took sealed themselves within seconds. Mr. Dukov was forced to shut down his pitch-blende gun before it could fully charge, and fired his electrical rifle 3 times into the monster's open wound, stunning it for long enough for us to reach our horses. By the time we were on horseback, the beast was up again and charging us, and flesh and bone was knitting anew over the open cavity in its skull. I fired the particle destabilizer again at its foreleg, and it took it off entirely. Hobbling it as it tried to chase us on 3 legs, we rode in the 4 directions and agreed to meet behind the quarantine line. I saw the beast to attempt to take off in pursuit of Mr. Roosevelt as the stump of its leg began to grow and take new form. But he was able to elude the Goliath, and by nightfall, we were among the soldiers at the barricade, our prides injured, but otherwise in good health. We prepared our trap in the fields near Graveson, a village between Tarasque and Avignon, that the Tarasque had lay waste to. And where the water table was amenable to our task, by careful observation we had adjudged that the beast stood about 9 feet at the shoulder, 6 feet wide, and 30 feet long. With the help of a few soldiers who Colonel D'Infrente had begrudgingly conceded to parting with, we dug a long trench in the field wide and long enough to contain the beast, and deep enough to stop the beast climbing loose before the damage could be done. In the bottom of the pit, we mounted steel rods sharpened to a fine point. By the hundreds, each tipped with noxious poison I had acquired in Orient. Running lengthwise through the center of the pit, we built a wooden bridge, large and sturdy enough to accommodate a man on horseback, but not so sturdy that it would not break and shatter under the weight of the Tarasque. 4 days we were involved in the earthwork. The digging done, we laid a net across the top, and it was covered with grass and leaves. From a distance, it looked to all the world like an ordinary patch of open land, beneath which lay doom. Mr. Harris has spotted the Tarasque not 2 miles from our location, and tomorrow we will spring the trap. Mr. Roosevelt has agreed to act as bait. He will approach the Tarasque on horseback and attack it once with his elephant gun, and once it gives chase, he will lure it into the pit. He is to gallop across the bridge and lure the Tarasque to follow him. And then when it attempts to do so, it will surely fall into the pit. Messrs. Dukov and Harris and I, lying in the way out of sight, will then join Mr. Roosevelt at the pit's edge and unleash the full fury of our armaments onto it. Our rifles and one-shot guns, the particle destabilizer, Mr. Dukov's electric rifle, and provided it has charged safely, he shall make his first firing of the pitch-blende gun. Once our armament has been exhausted, we shall pour 4 barrels of Mr. Dukov's jelly kerosene into the pit and ignite it. And Providence withstanding, nothing shall be left of the creature but ash and bone by sundown tomorrow. May 29th, 1883. Success! The plan went off without a hitch. It was an afternoon before Mr. Roosevelt could coerce the Tarasque into pursuing him, but surely enough the reptilian behemoth fell into the pit, impaled upon the spikes, and was stuck while the 4 of us rained destruction from above. The monster let loose a screech from the pits of damnation itself as bullets and explosives tore its flesh loose bit by bit, and jelly kerosene burned slowly and stopped it regrowing. Mr. Dukov warned us to avert our eyes. When he finally fired the pitch-blende gun and waned, his warning was justified. The blast was bright enough to blind, and a massive plume of smoke and fire erupted from the pit after he had pulled the trigger, seeming to blossom into a mushroom above us. By the time the fires have died down, a charred skeleton was all that remained. We have separated the beast's massive skull, blackened and perforated, from what remains of the monster, and a handful of soldiers who reported after the blast are hard at work filling in the pit with earth. Tomorrow we shall bring the skull back to Avignon and collect our reward. May 30th, 1883. Disaster! We were hailed as heroes by the army when we arrived in Avignon with our prize. In the morning light, the Tarasque skull seemed whiter than it had the night before, and more charred flesh stuck to it than it had seemed when we dragged it from the pit, though surely it was little more than an illusion. The 4 of us posed for photographs, and Mr. Dukov asked us to have his photograph taken with its head in between the massive jaws of our fallen prey. Imagine our horror when the jaws snapped shut, severing Dukov's head neatly at the shoulders. The skull of the Tarasque rolled loose from its place on the stage and snapped again, taking another chunk of his body. And the soldiers screamed and fainted as it seemed to be growing a new coating of flesh and scale over its charred exterior. We watched shocked as the honor guards fired a volley at the skull. The chips it took off seemed to replace themselves instantly, and I was dumbfounded as sinew and muscles seemed to spread across the creature's bones and knit into shape. The jaws of the disembodied Tarasque opened and it shouted in French, "Vos me rendez malade." From the other end of the plaza, I heard more screams and looked to see the impossible. The rest of the Tarasque, covered in earth and grime, held together by only a few strands of muscle. The headless carcass lurched through the square with uncanny speed, trampling men in its path, ignoring gunshot and cannon fire as it made to rejoin its body. From the corner of my eye, I saw Mr. Harris take off running. Mr. Roosevelt noted he was headed in the direction of the bank vault and his secret weapon. As the skull of the Tarasque seemed to be making its way towards where I stood, I gave Harris chase. We found Mr. Harris having dragged the crate of the vault into the lobby, hurriedly prying the boards loose. Soon the crate fell away, revealing a stone coffin that looked truly ancient. It felt as if all the heat fled the room when the sarcophagus was exposed, and I forced back a shudder as I beheld it. 3 chains with massive locks held the lid in place, and the lid and caskets itself were covered with hand-carved runes that looked to be Sumerian or Akkadian. I confess that I have not taken the time to learn the ancient languages of Mesopotamia. but I felt a distinct sense of wrongness emanating from the box as Mr. Harris drew a ring with 3 keys from his coat and began to unlock the seals, one by one. I begged with him to stop this madness and flee while we had the chance, and he insisted that once open, our victory would be secured. Mr. Harris pushed the lid aside and barely had a moment to regard his second weapon in the flesh, before an olive-toned arm, sword in hand, lashed out from within the box and sliced his head clean off. I'm gonna reread that one more time. I begged with him to stop this madness and flee while we had a chance, and he insisted that once open, our victory would be secured. Mr. Harris pushed the lid aside and barely had a moment to regard his secret weapon in the flesh before an olive-toned arm, sword in hand, lashed out from within the box and sliced his head clean off. In all my years of adventuring among the primitives and wild men of the world, I have never set eyes on a man who looked so savage, so elemental, so full of primal rage as the being that now climbed from the coffin, naked, sword in hand, its long black hair flowing behind it, its body covered head to toe in tattoos of eldritch imagery in ancient languages that resemble no script written by man. Sherman, the American general, is said to have his enemies, begging for mercy that they may as well appeal against the thunderstorm. What I beheld before me, I thought, was the very eidolon of the storm. Mr. Roosevelt attempted to entreat with the man and beg its assistance. Seeming to barely hear him, the godman set his eyes on Roosevelt and lunged with the sword. Roosevelt parried with his rifle, the barrel cracking under the onslaught, and in surprise the godman dropped the blade. Roosevelt picked it up and attempted to return the blow, and in an instant the godman somehow held another sword in each hand. Mr. Roosevelt did his best to fend off the assailant's onslaught, but found himself cornered soon. Though I am loath to intervene in a fair fight between 2 honest men, I could not bear to see Mr. Roosevelt cut down in the midst of the pandemonium. I drew my pistol and emptied its cylinder, discharging 5 rounds into the godman's head. Though it should have been dead, the olive-skinned destroyer turned and stared me down, like the Tarasque. Even with half its face gone, it seemed ready to kill. Dropping one of its blades, it moved its hand rapidly through the air and tossed something at me faster than I could react. In an instant, I could not move my arms. The man had somehow materialized a bola, a weapon used by the cowmen of South America to immobilize fleeing animals, and it had tied itself securely around my chest. Another flick and a second bola struck me around the legs, and I was down on the ground. He approached to land the killing blow, when behind me I saw the outer shell of the bank shudder and give way, and heard that the offensive roar, the cry of the Tarasque, nary a scratch upon it, as it entered the building in search of its would-be slayers. The godmen caught sight of the Tarasque and lost interest entirely in Mr. Roosevelt and I. This, I thought, must be why poor Mr. Harris considered him his secret weapon. This avatar of rage lived to fight, and in the Tarasque it had ultimate rival. To describe the fight that ensued between those 2 unkillable titans would take 100 pages or more. Mr. Roosevelt and I huddled in the safety of the bank vault, which alone seemed immune to the destruction the 2 rained upon each other. After the better part of an hour had passed, hundreds lay dead around them, the center of Vignon little more than rubble. The godman was missing an arm and half a leg and an eye, and the better part of his brain, and his stomach had been cut open. In a state where most men would be long dead, it continued to fight, severing even its own entrails and making weapons of them. The Tarasque had suffered as badly. It was on the ground, recuperating, when I saw the godmen take notice of Mr. Dukov's pitch-blende gun, lying near what remained at the stage that an hour ago had been the site of such jubilation. As we watched, the godman removed the core of the pitch-blende gun with uncanny precision. He made what seemed to be bombs and explosives appear, and it strapped into the device's core, which he mounted on his chest. Lighting a fuse, it charged at the Tarasque as it readied itself to meet him. Having seen the fury of the pitch-blende gun in a controlled state, Mr. Roosevelt and I had no desire to see what happened next. We retreated into the vault as a blinding light filled the square in a blistering wind, mightier than the hurricanes of the Caribbean, slammed the door shut, and sealed us within. It is dark. The light from my electric torch has provided just enough luminescence by which to write this account. I know not for how long the air in this vault will last. Aside from the lifeless body of Mr. Harris, there is nothing in this vault that approximates food or water, and as Christians and gentlemen, Mr. Roosevelt and myself have sworn not to pursue the dark path unless our lives themselves are on the line. I do not know if I will make it out of here alive. If I do not, let this diary be my last word and testament to the horrors that befall in this corner of the world. June 13th, 1883. Providence smiled upon us after all, in the end. On the morning of the 1st, the vault opened the door, and I regarded a major of the army and a company of men searching for survivors. Mr. Roosevelt and I were dehydrated from beginning to suffer from pitch-blende fever. Thank you. Mr. Roosevelt and I were dehydrated and beginning to suffer from pitch-blende fever, fortunately. I knew the address of one of my dear friend Henry's associates in Marseille, and upon being transported to the hospital, he met us there and provided the treatments necessary to stave off certain death that the malicious ague carries with it. Colonel Diafonte is dead, I have learned, and at least 10,000 others who were incinerated when Envigna was consumed by flame. Even those who had survived, I learned, had been burned or blinded, and pitch-blende fever will likely claim many of them in time. No sign has been seen of the Tarasque or the God-Man since the explosion, nor, for that matter, of the icy sarcophagus in which he apparently slept until late Mr. Harris loosed upon the city. It will take years, if not decades, to restore this ancient region to its former glory. We were two of the only handful of witnesses to one of the greatest disasters to strike France in recent memory. And having been at the center of it all, the army regarded us with great suspicion. We were interrogated several times, first by soldiers, then by police, then by politicians. A man who looked English watched and took notes, but said not a word as we told our story. In the end, we escaped transportation to Devil's Island, but the reward that had been promised was forfeit, and we were sternly warned that neither of us were welcome in France again so long as we lived. The explosion that claimed Envigna was seen for hundreds of miles. I learned in the press from Paris to New York were heavily embroiled in speculation, everything from a falling star to a German superweapon to the wrath of God himself was being proposed as an explanation. We were warned not to share our personal knowledge and the event with the others, as we were sent our way. Mr. Roosevelt and I parted way in Colossus. He intends to return to America, he informed me, and pursue a political career. In that, I wish him well. I returned to my house in London this afternoon, and was informed by Dees that a postcard had arrived for me this morning. The handwriting in the brief, unsigned note within carried that of the strange Englishman who attended the questionings, whose notes I caught brief glimpses of from time to time. I present that message below. To Lord Theodore Thomas Blackwood, CBE. The Royal Foundation for the Security, Containment, and Protection of Anomalous Objects and Phantasmagoria requests a meeting for the purpose of negotiating an alliance favorable to both our parties. Please call anytime, excepting Sundays, at number 19 Marylebone Road, Westminster, and ask to speak to Dr. Thursday. Your discretion is requested in this matter. I have not heard of this foundation before, and I do not know if I intend to take them up on their mysterious overture. Perhaps I shall hear them out. But I have never been one to serve in one man's employ for very long, and I value my freedom as a naturalist and explorer above all else. We shall see. Wow, what a good story.